Our roads are gridlocked. With a rapidly growing population, underinvestment in transport infrastructure, and the highest rate of car ownership in the OECD, the situation is only set to get worse. Congestion charging could be part of the solution. But to begin understanding how we could implement a successful congestion charging scheme, we must look internationally for guidance. Globally, schemes have succeeded or failed for various reasons. I spoke to WSP experts who were involved in successful and unsuccessful schemes. By learning from their experiences, we can develop a fair and equitable scheme that benefits our environment and transport infrastructure. My interviews with these experts were informative and extensive. I invite you now to join me for a taster.
So we did about an 8 to 10 week consultation with the public. So it was full-blown, what you would call a statutory consultation. Booked venues and spoke to thousands and thousands of people. We had adverts on buses, we had QR codes on bus seats so you could scan yourself through to the survey to answer whether or not you were in favour of the scheme, where you thought the revenue should be spent, what was your priority, and how you think the money was best allocated. We had a series of discounts and exemptions in terms of managing equity and fairness, so we consulted people on whether they thought we'd got that balance right. We focus very much on what's the dream bus network, how much does that dream bus network cost, and that's how much we need to raise. So we said there was money for buses, but there was also a notional kind of amount for active travel, or we called them complementary measures. There was a lot of new cycling infrastructure, but things like safe cycle parking or street lighting, improvements to bus stops, freight consolidation centres. So saying to the freight industry, we did quite a lot of work with the freight industry because we were proposing quite a high charge for HGVs. Could there be some freight consolidation centres on the outskirts? Lorries all go there and then they consolidate the deliveries, and they have one truck that goes in rather than 7. But I don't think we did enough to say to drivers, what are they going to get as well? So actually, one of the biggest issues here in the UK is potholes in the road surface. It's very emotive and it gets a lot of press column inches. So perhaps if we'd been a bit savvier about how are we going to sell this to the drivers, what do they get from it? You've got to be brave for this stuff. It is very controversial, and everyone on paper thinks, yeah, that's a super idea. Why wouldn't you do that? Generate some money for people to travel more sustainably, pay for improvements. But when you try and charge someone for something that they've previously not paid for, it's very difficult. And I would strongly advise having some sort of public relations PR campaign running alongside this, and being very clear about the messaging, making sure that the language is accessible. You treat the comms, the communications around a scheme like this, with as much respect and integrity as you would a technical piece of work. It's as important, because this is all about behaviour change. Be prepared for every group to come out of the woodwork saying they want a discount. So don't underestimate the time that will take to deal with those groups. And you must hear them, you must do something, you must react to them, because that's what this is all about. It's getting the right blend and balance.
I think there's two things. One is to understand what types of businesses are actually present in the local economy, what types of industries tend to dominate in certain parts of the city. But there's also the wider contextual, small businesses in construction, small businesses in retail and services, etc. A lot of people moving around for their kind of basic needs. But there's also part of the economy which is small businesses in construction, one-man bands, driving vans around, operating on very small margins. And that's really the part of the economy that can become quite impacted by congestion charge. And the solution there is to think about mitigating measures. Are there exemptions for certain types of businesses or for a certain size of business operating in a particular location? It's quite challenging to attribute land value uplift directly to a congestion charge. You can attribute it to place improvement that might occur as a consequence of reduced congestion. There's several kind of hoops to jump through before you get to the answer. But it's important to try and capture this because it's part of the case for the scheme, and part of the case that you make that the scheme is going to do positive things. You cannot understate the importance of a clear and consistent articulation of the benefits. My experience of road user pricing is every scheme is contentious. The public response is usually quite negative. And for that reason, I think we need to be very clear about the benefits. We need to evidence and quantify them. We need to express them and communicate them in ways which are easy to understand, easily accessible, and we need to consistently keep making the case. I think the recent experience we've had, there was this quite apparent negative reaction to it. The Mayor of London went along with it. He was very consistent in his approach, and one of the reasons he was determined to do it was because he wanted to stop Londoners dying of health conditions made worse by poor air quality that was introduced, and the vast majority of people adjust their behaviour and they pay the charge.
So before, about like 60% or so of the public, 65, were negative. Directly after the trial, we had like 60 or 55 or so percent that were positive. And now it's not an issue anymore. I mean, it's never discussed in Stockholm. It's been modified a couple of times, the scheme, but it's like a quite natural part of the Stockholm transport policy scene, I would say. It is governmental money. The way it's organized in Sweden legally is that it's a governmental tax. So the government gets the money, but then there's negotiations because it's acknowledged the fact that it's the road users of this region that pays. So there's a negotiation and the government assigns specific projects to this specific budget. And those specific projects will be within the region. There will be a public acceptance debate, and it's easy for us to discuss how do we manage that in terms of how do we win that debate so that there will be a congestion charging scheme. It's a reasonable debate to have, but it should be fed with proper arguments. So there should be like proper analysis made. So whenever people say this will force people into the city center and move those resources to people who are living in the city center, if that argument is raised, one should be able to either support it or say against it with proper analytical results. I think that is a very important thing. I don't think that it's the design that should be tested by the public per se, but I think that the trade-offs that design implies between equity, congestion relief, revenue generation, etc. Those trade-offs, that is the consequences of that scheme, has to be communicated and put up to public debate.
The recent proposal, which started in 2020, involved the institution of congestion pricing in Manhattan of New York City from 60th Street down south, all the way down to what they call the Battery, which is the bottom of Manhattan Island, and included every street within that area except for a couple of north-south running highways. All of the points of access and egress into Manhattan would have been tolled an additional charge during peak hours of upwards to $15 additional. This would have been an additional revenue source that would have gone directly to the MTA to continue to enhance the infrastructure as part of the city's service. The charge would be significantly less for freight because freight is a big issue in this region. So a lot of the freight is drayed in to New York City by truck. So there would have been a charge, but something substantially less than the private auto. They really were focusing on the private auto. And that's where they wanted to generate money. That's where they wanted to see the diversion and keeping the cars out of a very congested area of New York City. The program stipulated that the revenue would go directly to the MTA, 100%. Again, that's always been a point of conversation, discussion, and controversy, because the problem is that New Jersey would not get any of that money, but would have to accommodate this increase in demand on their transit system. You can kind of describe the 2 or 3 reasons of why this program did not proceed as politics. I mean, it really was. It was a lack of coordination and communication that occurred between the states, and it was also the inability to come up with a concept of revenue sharing amongst the states.